Welcome to an episode of Jews in the World. I'm Phyllis Zimbler Miller, and today I have with me a very special guest, Don Futterman. Now, I am going to interview him on his book, which I will hold up, a novel, Adam Unrehearsed. But also, he has, besides a day job, he has a podcast of his own, which is called the Promise Podcast. It's been going on for 13 years. It's about Israel and society. And he is in Israel. He made an Aliyah in 1994, so thanks to Zoom, we can have this conversation. So I just want to ask him why he wrote this book. He's a few years younger than I am, and the book it's a novel, very much resonated with me. And it takes place in his hometown of Flushing, New York. Okay, so tell us why you wrote this.
Well, I wanted to tell a story about a Jewish boy developing his Jewish identity, and a story within which the Jewish institutions in American Jewish life of the time, Hebrew school, junior congregation on Saturday morning, Shabbat morning, summer camp, that all these things were a positive experience, because for me they were a positive experience and really kind of a very constructive part of my life. So I in a lot of American Jewish fiction, that world was ridiculed. And certainly the fiction I grew up reading was always making fun of it, and sometimes brilliantly, skewering it, and I'm not saying it wasn't always rightfully so, but I had such a different experience. For me, it was so positive that I wanted to try to communicate that. I also wanted to give a sense of what it was like. My kids grew up in Israel. I have 3 kids. They all were all born and grew up here. Give them a sense of what it was like when I grew up in New York in the 60s and 70s. So I turned 12 in 1970, and that was also a really dramatic point, kind of a turning point for American Jews. I think similar in a different way to what's going on right now. But when I was a kid, I think we were the first generation who felt completely comfortable, completely accepted, and completely American. I mean, we were proud to be Jewish, and my non-Jewish friends were proud of whatever their own ethnic background was, or the religious background was, whether they were Italians or Greeks or Catholics or Protestants. Everyone embraced that, but we all felt that we were the same and that we were very, very American, which was dramatically different from my parents, who were born in the 20s and lived through the Depression, through World War II, and they were much more wary and much more fearful of anti-Semitism lurking in American society. And as a kid, I thought they were exaggerating. I thought they were paranoid, because we didn't have any experience of it. And even though Adam Miller, the character in the book, in Adam Unrehearsed, does encounter some anti-Semitism, it's not that he's running into anti-Semitism all the time. It's not terribly threatening, although it is menacing to him and menacing to his community, because there's some attacks on the synagogue, vandalism in the synagogue, which again, the people weren't sure how to interpret it. Now, when I was growing up in New York, that was happening in New York City. It wasn't happening so much in Flushing, although my own synagogue years later in the same decade, in the 70s, actually burned down. And there was a big debate within the community about whether this was an accident or this was arson. Was it an anti-Semitic act? What was behind it? And I don't think it was ever really resolved. Legally, it was termed an accident. But within the community, there was still anxiety that maybe it wasn't an accident. So it was still around. But it was a different time. And I think Adam is shocked when he encounters anti-Semitic language, when he encounters people who seem to be against the community, because it's so foreign to his expectations. I mean, it was an incredibly optimistic time for kids. We had landed on the moon a year before. So for an 11, 12-year-old boy, that just opened up all the horizons. All I could dream of was going to another planet. I mean, I was a science fiction nut when I was a kid. I read every science fiction book there was. I joined the science fiction book clubs. I signed up my friends so I could get the free books when they joined. And their parents called and complained because they would forget to send the books back, and the parents got these huge bills at the end of the year. But anyway, we were part of that can-do society on the one hand, where we thought we could solve any problem. We were going to fix ecological problems. That's how we talked about it back then. The environmental issues, mostly pollution was the one we were aware of, but we were going to fix that. We could fix anything. And at the same time, the U.S., the country was also in turmoil because we'd had major assassinations. Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the same year in 1968. There was America was in the middle of the Vietnam War. There was a huge anti-war movement going on. So there was it was a kind of a chaotic time with very mixed messages about whether everything was going great or everything was falling apart at the same time. But for Jews, there was also a moment in between the Six-Day War and the October 73 war, the Yom Kippur War. So after the Six-Day War, which I remember, I was very young, but we remember how proud we all were of the victory because it was over in a minute. It was a week and it was done, and we had defeated all these huge armies. So that gave us this enormous sense of pride in our little country on the other side of the world. And my parents took us to Israel, which I don't know if they would have done. My parents were both Zionists, but I don't know if they actually would have picked up and traveled to Israel, because in those days it was not so easy, and it was expensive, and it seemed like it was on the other side of the planet. And we visited Israel in 1969, and it wasn't like I fell in love with it. Everything was dusty. It was hot as hell. There was no air conditioning. I didn't like the food. All those things. I was a kid from New York in a very foreign place, but there was something thrilling about it. And I just saw how proud my father was. My father was in a constant state of kvel. Everywhere he looked, he just would go, "Look at what they've done. Look at what they've done. There was nothing here. Look at what they did. They built these buildings. They have buses running. Look at all these soldiers." And everything excited him, in a way that I'd never seen him get excited back home in New York. So, that stayed with me. And then, the 73 war, which was much more painful and much more difficult and evoked much more complicated and conflicting feelings, both for American Jews and Israelis. That was still a few years away. So we were kind of very proud and very optimistic about our futures and felt completely at home and completely comfortable. So when Adam runs into somebody who starts using an anti-Semitic slur, he's really shocked. He's really baffled. And that's based on something that did happen to me then, which at the time was very shocking. I would say we still were very hopeful. We still, it didn't turn my world upside down, but it was startling. And I had to start reassessing things and think about things differently. I mean, the other thing that happened then was this, I was going to say, as the Soviet Jewry movement started, which I think was like our cause. The Six-Day War was won by the Israeli army. So we were proud. We were, all puffed up our chests and felt good about it. And, it changed, it changed the image of the Jews as helpless weaklings, especially for males, for boys. To aspire to be an Israeli soldier was very exciting. But the Soviet Jewry movement was something where American Jews were leading the way, where we actually took the reins. I won't claim that I was a leader of that movement at all. I just attended rallies. I went to some events. I went to some actions. But that was like American Jewry asserting itself and saying, "Hey, we have a cause. We were not able to fight for the Jews during the Holocaust, we were not strong enough to really pressure the American government, but now we're established and we're not going to keep silent." So there was a very clear image in my mind. And again, we were growing up with all these images of the Holocaust and stories, and we started to see the first, documentaries that were shown about the Holocaust. So we had those horrific images in our head. And then here was this sense of there are millions of Jews who are trapped in the Soviet Union. And there were people who looked like us, who had names like ours, like our families' names. And they wanted to get out, and they wanted to go to Israel. So that was, I think, American Jewry taking a giant step forward and saying, we are going to assert ourselves, and we're going to try to influence what's happening in the world, and we're going to try to influence what's happening in American politics in order to achieve that aim. So I think, later on, years later, I think American Jews and North American Jews, Canadian Jews were very involved as well, took the lead in the fight for Ethiopian Jewry, to bring Ethiopian Jews to Israel when the Israeli government wasn't so excited about taking them. So, that was a different struggle. But the struggle for Soviet Jewry was, let's open the gates. I remember Solidarity Sunday, huge marches and demonstrations to get people out. And some of those people who we were demonstrating for are still alive, and like Natan Sharansky, who was still called by his Russian name Anatoly Sharansky back then, was a prisoner in the Gulag. I mean, he wrote an amazing book with my friend Gil Troy called Never Alone, which is about being a prisoner for 9 years in the Gulag, then spending 9 years in the Knesset, and he was the speaker of the Knesset for some of that time, and 9 years running the Jewish Agency. So he had this amazing life. But when he was in the Gulag, he was kept in solitary confinement almost the entire time. He wasn't out with all the other prisoners, and he kept his sanity. One of the stories he tells is he kept his sanity by playing chess in his head, and figuring out moves just to keep his mind sharp. So he's an amazing figure. And then he came to Israel, and of all the Jewish refuseniks in Russia who actually made it to Israel, he's one who became a very public figure in Israel as well, and an influential figure as well. When I was 23, I was sent to Russia to meet with refuseniks. And refuseniks, for the people who are not familiar with the term, is what we call the Jews who were refused permission to emigrate. It was considered a crime to want to emigrate from the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was paradise. And if you want to leave paradise, then you're attacking the Soviet Union as being illegitimate. So the Jews were not allowed to leave. In 1981, I was sent to meet with refuseniks in Moscow and then in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, which are really far-flung, isolated Jewish communities who had come there during World War II and were very cut off from most of the Jews in the world. But they knew about Israel and they wanted to come to Israel. And most of these people had lost their jobs as soon as they asked for permission to emigrate, or if they had been students, they were kicked out of the university. Now, I remember the first family we met in one of these cities, I think in Kyrgyzstan, had a suitcase by the door, and I said, "Are you going on a trip?" And they said, "Oh no, it's packed for when we go to Israel." And I said, "Oh, how long has it been there?" They said, "For 6 years." So eventually these people did get out, and a lot of them came to Israel. Other people came to the United States, but that was this cause that we were all part of as we were growing up, and felt like we could do something. I tell my kids the stories about being interrogated by the KGB when I landed in Moscow, because I was wearing a trench coat, and I had Hannah Senish's diary in Russian in the pocket of the trench coat. I was given this by the people who were sponsoring these trips. They gave me a whole bunch of books and other materials to bring to the refuseniks. The security guy, didn't really search my suitcase, didn't find anything. We came in 4 or 5 hours late. It was 4 and 5 in the morning. They were too tired to do a check, but he was using a metal detector, running it up and down my body, and he banged into the book with his metal detector. It didn't set off the detector, just hit it. And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's nothing." He said, "Take it out." So I took out the book. He looked at what it was. He put his hand up, blew a whistle, and suddenly I was surrounded. And I was carried off to another room where I was interrogated by a man in a suit, who, after about 45 minutes of arguing with him, he said to me, "You do realize I'm not from customs, don't you? I am from a different organization." So I said, "Okay." And it was right before Shavuot, and I had Megillat Ruth with me, which I was going to give to one of the families we were visiting there. And I said to him, we argued about every single book which he took away. And I said, and he took my personal Siddur, which I had was only in Hebrew. He said, "I can't read this." Every other book, he said, Zionist fascist propaganda, and took it to another pile and said, if I wanted to, I could get it on my way out of Russia, which was the last thing I wanted to do, was call attention to myself again when I was leaving Russia. Anyway, but we argued about about Megillat Ruth, the book of Ruth. And I said to him, "This is from the Bible. You know what the Bible is?" He said, "Yes, of course, I know what the Bible is." I said, "This is a love story. This is not Zionist fascist propaganda." And I kept looking for anything in the story that had to do with love, and I read him those verses. So finally, after like 5 or 6 minutes of this, he said, "Okay, okay, take it. Get out of here." So I got that one book through, along with other things, but the rest of the books, I think some KGB agents have been reading them for these last few decades.
Well, I just to remind people of what it was like in those years. When my husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany, my husband had a security clearance. He was in military intelligence as an officer. And eventually I got a security clearance. And we were not allowed to go anywhere in Eastern Europe. We weren't even allowed to go into East Berlin because we might be kidnapped by the
Wow.
Russians. So we were very careful. In Munich, we didn't have to burn our mail, but in military intelligence people we knew in Berlin literally had to burn
Wow.
their mail. So, and we were there to stop the Russians from, as we said, coming across.
Right.
And on New Year's Eve of New Year's Day of 1971, when we went to the officers' reception at the Officers Club in Munich, it's freezing cold. There's no one else in the street except for the Soviet spy, which we all knew as he watched us come in and out. It's a
Right.
very interesting time that I
Yeah.
hope the younger,
And they weren't subtle. In some of
no,
the places they were following us, there was a car with 6 men in black trench coats packed into a small car, driving along next to us in the street wherever we went. So, we let the people we were visiting guide us to tell us whether it was safe to come in or not, because they also knew the KGB. I mean, again, some of these were really far-flung places, so they knew who the local KGB agents were. They would say, if they said come back tomorrow, come back in the morning, that's what we would do. And if they said no, it's fine, come in, we just followed their lead. So it was a crazy time. I was 23. I don't know that I felt invulnerable, but my parents were much, much more worried than I was. I was like, okay, the worst they're going to do is beat us up. Maybe they'll kick us out of the country. They're not going to do anything more than that. We were traveling as students. We claimed to be students of cultural anthropology, which would explain why I was carrying a tape recorder and other things, for the research I wanted to do. And we did go on all of the official tours they organized for us because we were students. So they were taking us around on cultural tours in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. In Moscow, they didn't care about us. They had bigger fish to fry. But we saw the microphones hanging out of the ceiling in our hotel room. So we made sure that we only spoke about anything serious if we were out in the street.
well, my husband and I never, we worked in different units, but we had a joke because we had army quarters. The chandelier of the dining room table, we'd always say, speaking to the microphone. And
Right.
I started my security job in September of 71, and we went to Denmark for a week beforehand. And I signed all the papers, understanding what pickups were. Classic pickup. Do you remember Arthur? It's $5 or $10 a day guidebook. So we're in one
Yeah,
of these
sure.
restaurants. It's September. All the tourists have gone home, and we're eating in one of these cheap places. And a guy sits down next to us, and he starts saying, he said, I've just been to Russia. He said, they're really something. He said, these Danes, they're so frivolous. My husband and I looked at each other. This is exactly what we had been prepared for. We kicked
Right.
each underneath the table. We got up, we took our trays, we put the trays down, and we ran all the way to Tivoli Gardens and halfway through because it was a classic pickup. And my husband had short military haircut.
Right.
And so I hope young people listening to this understand that it was a really different time. And
Yeah.
Adam so to get back to the novel, and Adam Unrehearsed, it's 1970 and 1971, and he's preparing for his bar mitzvah. And the person who trains him is a cantor who, although it's not said so explicitly, clearly is a Holocaust survivor. Is that what I was supposed
Yes.
to
Yeah. Yeah. No, he's a survivor. In the book, he's from Romania, and there's a story about something that happened to him there that he did after the war, actually, in Romania. But he's a survivor who's come to New York. And so again, this is only 25 years later, 1970, 71.
I know.
It wasn't as historical as it feels today. So that's also part of that was his direct personal experience. So, and the Cantor is a very, I mean, I think he's a very lovable character. He's one of the favorite characters. People who've read the book, tell me that they really love him. They also love the
Yes.
older brother. And he becomes a mentor figure for Adam. The book is also very funny. So there's comic scenes with them, and there's serious scenes with them. And he takes Adam under his wing, and Adam is not a particularly good singer, but he decides this boy, because he likes him, is going to do more than any kid has ever
Right.
done in this synagogue. He's not just going to read the Haftorah like every kid does for their bar mitzvah, and come up and say the bracha before and after. He's also going to do the entire Torah reading. He's also going to lead shacharit. He's going to lead the service. He's going to do everything. And so the Cantor trains him to do all these things, and it's very hard. I mean, Adam. The book is called Adam Unrehearsed, and Adam, in the course of the novel, is preparing for two kinds of performances. He's getting ready for his bar mitzvah, where again, he's going to be up there on the bima, leading the whole congregation for several hours. This is a conservative shul. He's not an Orthodox kid. He doesn't know all this stuff. He goes to public school, so he's got to learn it all, during this 1 year. But at the same time, Adam falls in love with acting in his drama class in junior high school. And so he will stage a play. I don't want to give too much away in the course of the novel, but it's called Adam Unrehearsed because he's rehearsing all the time in this book. He's rehearsing for his bar mitzvah. He's rehearsing for the play that he's putting on. And yet it's all those moments in life that you can't rehearse for that actually are the ones that make the most difference for him, that are the most meaningful and the most significant. So he goes through a lot of challenges in this book.
And I think it was very interesting that that you captured, obviously it must be quite a bit autobiographical, what it was like when he would second guess himself. Should he have said something?
Yeah.
Should he not? What
Right.
was the best thing to say? And which adults can you trust to say something, and which adults can you not trust? And I think that's as true then as it is today, especially for our Jewish kids in school now. I think it's more true for them today.
And we didn't know, like when we were I went to public school in New York City all the way through, and we didn't know which teachers were Jewish and which teachers weren't Jewish. I mean, it turned out there were a lot of Jewish teachers in New York City. That was part of what the whole 1968 teacher strike ended up being about, or kind of got distorted to be about. But most of them were not public about it. People did not speak about that. So we would discover along the way which teachers were Jewish. Sometimes we didn't always know, but some of them would tell us. There were a lot of Jewish kids in my school and a lot of non-Jewish kids in the school. It was a very, very mixed community. So it was, and that was part of the thing, because he ends up putting on a play that's very Jewish, has Jewish content, but for a mixed audience of kids, later for adults, for parents and teachers. And he doesn't know how it's going to work. And the kids he's acting with are not Jewish. The kid, he's doing it with a kid who's not Jewish. So there's this whole discovery for Adam of becoming much more aware of his Jewish identity and how other people see it, or what they get or what they don't get. And he has to try to explain it to people when he's trying to figure it out himself. And what you said before about adults, I think kids at that age, and certainly with some of the experiences he goes through, start to question the adult world for the first time. They're used to trusting adults. We grew up in a very solid, loving, middle-class Jewish family. My father was a doctor. My mother was a nurse in real life. That was, and then to start to say, wait, maybe adults don't always know everything. Maybe adults are wrong about some things. That's a real transformational moment for a kid. When you start to put together the world another way. I think that's a lot of what adolescence is about and what the teenage years are about. So Adam is doing it. Hopefully, a lot of it is comic, the way he's figuring it out. And as you said, he's always have a conversation going on with himself. because he's he's a good kid. He's used to doing what he's supposed to, or at least where the adults can see him, he does what he's supposed to. And if he
Yes.
wants to do something else, he's smart enough to do it where they won't see it. That they're not aware of it. And he'll get away with whatever he can get away with. But ultimately, they're pretty good kids. So I mean, the book is also very much a story of friendship, of friendships that are forming, new friendships that are forming, and old friendships that dissolve. Sometimes for no apparent reason, or at least not apparent to the main character.
Yes, I thought that was a very poignant part of what is basically a comedic novel, is trying to understand how friends change and interests change. In junior high school, you called it middle school, right? But in my day, it
No,
was,
we called it junior high school back then. Today they call it middle school, but
oh, right.
then
I
we
got
called it junior
confused.
high school.
So mine was 7th through 9th. What year was yours
Right.
also?
Ours was also 7th through 9th, but in New York you had what was called the SP, a special program, which was if you did it all 3 years, you could do a 3-year SP, or you just had enriched classes. But you could also do a 2-year SP, which combines 7th, 8th, and 9th grades into 2 years. So that's what I did, and that's what Adam is doing in the novel. So he's in 7th grade, and the next year he's going to be in 9th grade. So you jump.
I kind of
And
figured that out. I figured that out
yeah,
in my
and I
mind.
think
Yeah.
I think it was also the schools were overcrowded. They were trying to figure out ways to get the kids out through the school faster. So, but maybe they just thought, that 8th grade was negotiable. Maybe apparently they thought we could do without it because we didn't have it. And then we got to high school young. I mean, I came to Israel after high school on what would today be called a gap year program on the Youth Institute for Leaders from Abroad for different Zionist youth movements, because by then I was very active in Young Judea. So I actually got to college at 18, which would be the regular, the normal age to go to college, because I'd spent a year in Israel after high school before I started college. So, Adam he's in the smart class. These are the bright kids. They're doing things faster, but they're also isolated from the rest of the school because they have most of their classes with just the same kids with each other, because those are the accelerated classes. So there was good sides and bad sides to that. I heard from a friend who was in my class who called me. We talked about the novel the other day, so it was amazing to hear her memories of like what it was like back then. Because I mean, there are a lot of autobiographical incidents, but a lot of it is also made up. So a lot of it is fictionalized, or things that didn't happen to me but happened to someone else, or that I invented, or to serve the interests of the story or the characters, and keep people engaged.
So I wrote a novel that
Really?
takes place in the same year, 1970, spring of 1970, called Mrs. Lieutenant. And it's about the first 9 weeks that Mitch and I were at Fort Knox. And again, a lot of it is true, a lot of it is not true, a lot of it happened to other people. But again, very much a time of, in 1970, the Civil Rights Act was only 6 years old.
Right.
And the Army was integrated at this point, but in many ways it was more segregated by class between enlisted and officers. And just to tell you in one sentence, the really true part of my book is that there ended up being a training for officers' wives, and I was the chair of the entertainment committee for the tea at the end. And literally, there was me, the Northern Jew, the Southern Baptist who didn't know what Jews were, and she and I shared a car for 9 weeks because our husbands carpooled. The African American and 2 Puerto Ricans, one of whom didn't speak English.
Wow.
And this
Wow.
is right after the Kent State shootings and, in the incursion in Cambodia. And so again, it was a really interesting time. And as my husband and I were just reminiscing, so at the Officers Club at Fort Knox, when the pool opened, I was reading the nonfiction book, While 6 Million Died. And the Southern Baptist who shared, we were always together because we shared the car. Her husband, who had a master's in parasitology, told her she didn't have to believe it. She, of course, had not heard of it. Okay, comes from a small Southern town. But to tell his wife she didn't have to believe the book reminded us, that's why Mitch and I were talking about it today, of people who deny what happened October 7th.
Right.
And
No,
I
no,
don't know
that's
whether people deny it because it's easier than facing the horror, or because they're really I don't want to say evil-minded people because she certainly wasn't.
Uh, Look, I think, I mean, what part of what's happening right now, I mean, we're reading about it abroad and we're all horrified. Although I was actually in D.C. the day for one of the pro-Palestinian rallies, and look, I'm very liberal, very leftist. I believe there should have been a Palestinian state a long time ago, but watching the reaction to what's going on here, I mean, the horrors of October 7th are unprecedented. And this was the worst thing that's happened to Israel in its history. And it's the worst atrocity against Jews since the Holocaust. I mean, there's nothing that comes close. And, we all know people who were killed. I know people who were killed there. We all know people whose children were murdered there. It's so horrific, and the details are so gory and awful. I think people either just can't, either they don't know, or it so contradicts the narrative they've been telling themselves for years, that they don't want to face it. And then they see the bombing in Gaza, they see the horrific images from Gaza and the super high casualty numbers. Whether the numbers are accurate or not, certainly a lot of people are getting killed. It's, and that fits their narrative. So they accept that very easily. And those are the images they've been watching for the 7 weeks or 8 weeks since October 7th. So so I understand why people are upset, but certainly people who have any kind of role as a leader or a public intellectual have a moral responsibility to pay attention and to recognize absolute evil when you see it. I mean, for the young people who are out protesting against Israel now, this is the worst atrocity that's happened in their lifetime, or at least their conscious lifetime. They don't remember September 11th,
Yes.
if they're, unless they're a little older. So this is the worst thing that's happened. And to not recognize that it just happened, to not be horrified by it, whatever your view about Palestinian aspirations is to me morally indefensible and an indictment of their education, and how they've been taught to look at things. And yeah, Holocaust denial turned out to be an effective tactic. So I think people are using that tactic. Some people are doing it deliberately in a direct attempt to manipulate public opinion, and other people are falling into it because it's just easier than dealing with the horrors of what actually happened. I don't have another way to explain it, but it is shocking. It's shocking to see people who really should and in fact do know better taking these lines or contextualizing. I mean, there was a big thing this week about the horrors of the sexual violence and rapes, and I don't want to go into the horrible details on this discussion.
I've done a podcast about that already. Go ahead.
So you know about that, and it's being very documented in detail right now. And then you still hear people. I mean, the UN finally made a statement about it now. Finally, 2 months later. But there's still people contextualizing and say, yes, but you have to understand you don't have to understand. This is inhuman. It's unforgivable what they did. And what it means is that the people behind it, which is Hamas, cannot be allowed to continue in power. So that it's very hard for us to take. I think it's very different than the kind of anti-Semitism I'm writing about in the book. That is kind of residual, casual anti-Semitism. Some in the African-American community, I think, growing out of resentment, some of it the tensions that occurred in New York during the teacher strike, when the predominantly Jewish teachers union ended up finding itself pitted against community activists in African-American communities who wanted more control of their schools and of the hiring and firing of the faculty. And I think then also things were manipulated deliberately to polarize people, to try to make it more extreme, to frighten the Jewish teachers on the one hand, and to make the African Americans angrier. And I think that the Black Jewish Alliance, which I'm not saying every Jew was out there marching for civil rights, but certainly the part of the Jewish community I grew up in was completely supportive of that. And that was something that we took for granted. That was part of our credo. That was part of our pride as being Jews, that we supported civil rights, that we went to the rallies or went to the marches or donated money, whatever people did. That was part and parcel of being Jewish. That was an expression of our Jewish values, and to us that was obvious. So to find those tensions coming or to feel the ricochets coming from the Black community was particularly painful. And a lot of Jews felt betrayed. And then there was also, things were changing. The Jews were getting more solidly established in the middle class and upper middle class. So there started to be more class tensions and issues. And there were a lot of, street gangs and violence, some of which comes up in the book, that nobody was really handling. So people were just having their own personal experiences that were frightening, and that was also, causing a lot of tensions. I think in the novel, there's also different voices, and Adam's hearing different perspectives from the adults around him and his older brother about whether these things really are threatening or not, how widespread this is or not, and his father is telling him, don't exaggerate it. You've had a few encounters. Don't turn this into, everybody hates the Jews. That's not what's going on here. And truthfully, up until this moment, where things are all getting jumbled together, I would say, the American Jewish story is this unbelievable success story. Of course, we had the tragedy at Squirrel Hill 5 years ago, so it's not like it started, on October 7th. I think a lot of anti-Semitism that really had been buried, or people had learned not to speak about it publicly, came out of the woodwork.
Yes.
After Trump was elected, and after he gave legitimacy to white supremacists, they were also anti-Semitic, besides being racist. So I think a lot of stuff that we weren't hearing so much started to come out much more publicly since then.
Yes, but we're not going to discuss politics on the show. It's just to say that's what's really hurtful right now after October 7th is how many people on the left have been their anti-Semitism is reared their ugly head. And on college campuses, I follow this very closely.
Yeah.
It's just really, really difficult. I have a mentoree at a 2-year college, Santa Monica College here in Los Angeles. And just what she's tried to stand up, and until the organization Stand With Us wrote a 6-page legal letter, she was unsuccessful. She met with the president and, with the club advisor, and nothing happened. So we have a lot to do.
And it's shocking. It's shocking because universities today are so much more committed to safe spaces and trigger words and things that and here, right, and then it's like, wait, why are we the exception? Maybe other groups feel they're also the exception, but we're certainly feeling it now, and it's really startling. I think in the novel, Adam is learning to stand up against these things for the first time as well as a kid. His brother is a member of Beitar, which is a Zionist youth movement, which was militant, kind of in league with the Jewish Defense League, the JDL. And they see themselves as, proud Jews are going to stand up. And Adam isn't completely comfortable with that either. He's like, oh, wait, because I don't want to become like the people who are attacking me either. So there's a whole tension there, which also creates some comical scenes where he has to figure out what to do. And they have at least one encounter with a gang, which was resolved very peacefully. But there's it's I guess it's a part of an experience that we keep facing. We keep facing it in different generations. And I think that's, maybe if in 1970, 71 was one inflection point in the Jewish community, maybe today is another one. And we have to try to make sure we're not ignoring it, at the same time keeping it in perspective, and at the same time asserting ourselves and demanding, demanding the protection and security we should have.
Absolutely. This has just been a really delightful conversation. Before I close, I want to give you a chance to say 2 things. Where can you get the book? Where can people get the book? And where can they watch your podcasts or listen to your podcasts?
So the podcast is on TLV1, but if you just go into your podcast app and type in The Promise Podcast, you'll find it. I have a second podcast called Futterman's One Man Show, which are comic autobiographical monologues. So if you just put in Futterman's One Man Show, you'll get there. There's 6 episodes that are up, and another couple that are coming up in the next month or 2. And the book is available on Amazon, at Barnes and Nobles, at bookshop.org. Or you can go into your bookstore. Even better, go into your bookstore and ask them to order the book. So
Yes.
it's called Adam Unrehearsed. But you can also get it on an ebook or Kindle edition, or you can get the hardcover. And it's been out since November 14th, which I think was the day of the big pro-Israel
Right.
rally
Okay,
in
wait, one more
America.
question. Is there going to be a sequel? Is Adam going to have some more experiences?
There will definitely be another novel. I'm not sure exactly if it's going to be a little later in his life. I'm not sure it'll be the same character, but yes, there'll certainly be more to come.
Excellent. Okay, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it.
No,
Bye.
thank you.